Today, Sudan is at war with itself, with nations evacuating their citizens as early as possible. This is a story that dates back to many decades in the past, from the colonial days in the 1950s through independence with political instability and economic struggles. Even in the 1960s and 1970s, Sudan experienced several military coups and attempted coups, as well as civil wars between the government and southern separatists. These events of time took the lives of millions of people and destroyed a lot of properties. In 1989, a coup d'etat took place, and for the next 30 years, the presidency remained stable, but this created a dying test for power, leading to what we see today, a period of uncontrollable power snatch. In this video, you will understand why the situation has gotten to where it is today. My name is Bernard, and you're watching African Dream Motivation. Stay tuned. Everything Sudan is experiencing in modern times was masterminded and blueprinted by one man, Omar Al Bashir. Al Bashir came to power in a military coup in 1989 and quickly established an Islamic regime that imposed Sharia law and restricted political freedom. He was accused of suppressing opposition groups, cracking down on oppositions, and censoring the media. His presidency was also marked by several conflicts, including a long-running civil war in southern Sudan that lasted from 1983 to 2005 and resulted in the death of an estimated 2 million people. He was also accused of war crimes and genocide in Darfur region, where a conflict between government forces and rebel groups led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people and the displacement of millions. His regime was also criticized for its economic policies, which were marked by corruption and mismanagement. The country experienced high inflation, food shortages, and widespread of poverty under his rule. Almost everyone felt the harsh and authoritarian government imposed on them, but all hard feelings were kept within the hearts of people and dared not to slip through their mouth. While he was enjoying his presidency, rebel groups began rising, and this became a great threat. In 2013, he created the Rapid Support Forces, which is a paramilitary force initially formed as a branch of the Sudanese armed forces to combat rebel groups in the Darfur region of Sudan. However, it has since become a separate entity and is now under the direct command of the Sudanese government. The Rapid Support Forces is primarily composed of former members of the Janjaweed militia, which was accused of carrying out atrocities during the Darfur conflict. They have also been accused of committing human rights abuses and war crimes, including indiscriminate attacks on civilians, rape, torture, and extrajudicial killings. These special forces plays a major role in military takeovers and civilian wars in Sudan. Having had a fair idea of how they came into existence, we will come back to them later in this video. From the beginning of 2018, protesters became more confident, demonstrations began gathering momentum, and by the end of the year, the revolution has spread throughout the country like wildfire. The protests began in December 2018, initially sparked by rising food prices and fuel shortages, but quickly turning into a broader call for political change and an end to Al Bashir's rule. The protests were largely peaceful, but were met with a violent crackdown by the security forces, leading to numerous deaths and arrests. In April 2019, the protests intensified, with tens of thousands of people taken to the streets in the capital, Khartoum, and other cities around the country. The military, which had long been a key supporter of Al Bashir's regime, initially attempted to quell the protest, but ultimately turned on him. On April 11, 2019, the military announced that it had removed Al Bashir from power and established a transitional military council to govern the country. Al Bashir was subsequently arrested and charged with corruption and other crimes. The ouster of Al Bashir was met with widespread celebrations in Sudan, but the military's subsequent takeover of power and establishment of the Transitional Military Council was met with continuous protests and calls for civilian-led government. After months of negotiation, the Transitional Military Council and opposition groups signed a power-sharing agreement in August 2019, establishing a joint civilian-military government and paving the way for elections in 2022. However, the transition was marked by ongoing unrest and violence. The military were still thirsty for power, and they watched strategically from the side as the transition was gradually making progress. The tension was still high, and the atmosphere was ripe for another surprise, and surely a surprise did pass through. The military did their thing again. A new chapter had been opened, with the military sharing power with the civilian politicians, hoping to smoothly lead the country to democracy. Tensions grew between the civilians and military factions of the government since the power-sharing agreement was signed in August 2019. The agreement established a joint civilian-military government, but the military was given significant control over key ministries and security forces. The situation came to a head in October 2021 when Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok attempted to remove the military-appointed governor of the eastern state of Kassala. The move was seen as a challenge to the military's authority and sparked protests and clashes between the military and civilian supporters. On October 25, 2021, the military responded by launching a coup and dissolving the transitional government. Prime Minister Hamdok and other civilian leaders were arrested, and the military declared a state of emergency and suspended the country's constitution. Once again, the military had acted out of greed, disregarding the transitional procedure and destroying the democratic future of the nation. This was clearly a wrong approach, and as at that period, if there was something the Sudanese citizens were not afraid of, then it was protest. The unrest escalated and protests against the military takeover intensified. The coup was met with widespread condemnations from the international community, and even more Sudanese citizens took to the streets to demand a return to civilian rule. The military responded to the protests with a heavy-handed crackdown, with reports of security forces using live ammunition and tear gas to disperse crowds. Dozens of people were killed, and many more were injured in the violence. The internet and communication networks were also shut down by the military, which made it difficult for people to organize and communicate with each other. The situation in Sudan remains volatile, with ongoing protests, strikes, and civil disobedience campaigns. The military established a new government, but many Sudanese citizens and international organizations called for a return to civilian rule and a transition to democratic government. The United Nations has also condemned the violence and human rights abuses in Sudan, and the international community imposed sanctions and other measures to pressure the military to restore democracy and respect human rights. But this was not in the book of al-Burhan, the leader of the military takeover. But who is Abdel Fattah Abdurrahman al-Burhan? He played a key role in the military coup that overthrew the transitional government and dissolved the power-sharing agreement. He declared a state of emergency and assumed full control of the country. He defended the coup as a necessary measure to restore stability and prevent further violence in the country. However, his true intentions clearly precede him. He held power, ignoring concerns of human rights abuses and the rise of atrocities by the military. He has been in power since 2021 with no intent of giving civilian rule a chance. But as the Ghanaian proverb says, if a bird stays too long on a tree, it attracts a stone. This is where the rapid support forces comes in again. And this time, their goal is to take over the country. These clashes between the sitting military government and the rapid support forces faction of the military is what has resulted in the 2023 Sudan unrest, which we will talk about in our next and final chapter. The military terrorizing citizens has been the order of the day, with clashes happening here and there. But in 2023, things were about to change. The house was divided against itself, and it surely needed to fall. An armed group conflict between rival factions of the military government of Sudan began on 15th April 2023. It started when clashes broke out of Western Sudan in the capital city of Khartoum and in the Darfur region. As of 25th April, at least 559 people had been killed and more than 4,000 others had been injured. The fighting began with attacks by the paramilitary rapid support forces on key government sites. Airstrikes, artillery, and gunfires were reported across Sudan, including the capital, Khartoum. As of 5th May 2023, both the Rapid Support Force leader, Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, and Sudan's de facto leader and army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, claimed control of several key government sites, including the General Military Headquarters, the Presidential Palace, Khartoum International Airport, Burhan's official residence, and the SNBC headquarters. Today, factions of the military are at war, with one fighting to maintain power and the other fighting to snatch it. Civilians caught up in the unfortunate exchanges of ammunition have to find their own way to survive. Many are injured, a lot of lives have been lost, and those who could get out of the country have done so. It is still ongoing. The two generals have led Sudan to the brink of renewed civil war. It is so sad that they are willing to go any length to take power and keep it for themselves. I hope the country finds itself out of the dangerous maze of power thirst. Thank you for watching to the end. Kindly subscribe and click on the notification bell so that you don't miss any new video we post. Check out other great videos on this channel. See you in our next video. Until then, have a wonderful day.